the forgotten structures of early humanity. In the vast narrative of human civilization, the physical remnants of early ingenuity are scarce and fleeting. Time, nature, and the hands of men have not been kind to the ancient structures once painstakingly assembled by early human societies. Whether constructed from perishable materials, located in vulnerable geographic zones, or intentionally dismantled or neglected by successive generations, many of these early architectural feats have long vanished from sight, leaving behind only fragments, myths, and speculative sketches. It is no wonder that many of the oldest known human settlements today, Göbekli Tepe, the Indus Valley ruins, or the structures of Mesopotamia, were only rediscovered through diligent archaeological efforts in the 19th and 20th centuries. These rediscoveries remind us that our understanding of the ancient world is far from complete. Amid this historical obscurity, it comes as a profound surprise when a possible man-made structure from antiquity emerges not from the earth but from the sea, a supposed bridge stretching between two islands off the southern tip of the Indian subcontinent, long believed by some to be either a geological marvel or the vestige of myth itself. This structure, commonly known today as Adam's Bridge, or by its more ancient name, Rama's Bridge, is perhaps one of the most enigmatic and least widely known formations in world geography. Stretching across the shallow waters that separate Pamban Island, which lies off the southeastern coast of Tamil Nadu, India, from Mannar Island belonging to Sri Lanka, this curious series of limestone shoals has inspired both scientific investigation and mythological reverence. Though most modern atlases depict these islands as discrete, disconnected entities, a closer look at satellite imagery reveals an astonishing natural or possibly artificial connection between them, a stretch of seemingly deliberate stone formations that arc across the sea in a narrow, jagged path resembling an ancient causeway. Despite its grandeur and potential significance, Adam's Bridge remains unfamiliar to many outside the Indian subcontinent. Even those who have visited Sri Lanka or southern India often remain unaware of the formation's existence. This obscurity may stem from several factors: its remote location, its classification as a shoal rather than a clearly constructed monument, and the larger issue that many historical anomalies struggle with the discomfort they bring to established historical timelines. Structures that defy easy categorization, especially those suggesting technological or organizational capabilities beyond what we typically attribute to early human societies, are often met with skepticism or silence. Yet the bridge exists not in rumor or legend alone, but in physical, observable form, a chain of sandbanks and coral rocks extending across more than 30 kilometers of shallow sea. What makes this structure particularly compelling is not merely its physical presence, but the weight of interpretation that hangs upon it. To some, it is a mundane geological formation shaped by tidal currents and coral sedimentation over millennia. To others, it is the remnant of a prehistoric land bridge once connecting the Indian subcontinent to the island of Sri Lanka during periods of lower sea levels. And to yet another group spanning historians, religious scholars, and spiritual adherents, it is a forgotten monument of ancient engineering constructed by early humans, perhaps even inspired or aided by forces beyond human comprehension. This convergence of science, folklore, and mystery makes Adam's Bridge an especially fertile ground for exploration and inquiry. The bridge's dual identity, both a real geological feature and a mythical passage, has inspired debate for centuries. In Hindu tradition, it is known as Rama Setu, the Bridge of Rama, named after the deity king from the epic Ramayana. According to the tale, Rama built this bridge with the help of the Vanara army, intelligent monkey-like beings, in order to rescue his wife Sita from the demon king Ravana of Lanka. While this story is often interpreted metaphorically or theologically, the physical presence of a bridge-like formation at the very location described in the text raises fascinating questions. Could myth and history intersect more directly than previously imagined? Might ancient stories preserve encoded memories of real human undertakings transmuted into divine acts over time? The possibility of human intervention in the creation of Adam's Bridge challenges several assumptions about early civilization. Traditional historical models suggest that advanced civil engineering, particularly on the scale of causeways and sea-spanning bridges, emerged much later in human history, well after the development of urban settlements, writing systems, and metallurgy. The presence of such a structure in an era predating these milestones would imply a level of societal coordination, logistical planning, and environmental mastery far beyond what is typically ascribed to early coastal communities of the Indian Ocean. And yet, if the bridge is indeed man-made or at least man-altered, such a reassessment may be warranted. Indeed, the implications stretch far beyond archaeology. If the bridge is human-built, it hints at a lost chapter in human history, one in which early humans were not merely hunter-gatherers or rudimentary settlers, but capable of orchestrating immense construction projects, possibly guided by astronomical or navigational knowledge. It would demand a revision of our understanding of prehistory, perhaps aligning more closely with ancient oral traditions than previously considered. Conversely, if the bridge is entirely natural, its formation must still be explained through a combination of geological, tidal, and sedimentary processes, making it an equally remarkable phenomenon from a scientific standpoint. What complicates the matter further is the apparent intentionality of the structure's appearance. Unlike irregular coral reefs or scattered shoals, Adam's Bridge presents as a continuous narrow formation uniform in direction and approximate width, almost as if designed to be crossed. The shallow waters, only about 1 to 3 meters deep along most of its length, would have made it traversable in antiquity, either by foot or with minor bridging techniques. Historical records from various maritime sources, including British naval documents from the 18th and 19th centuries, even noted the presence of a land connection at certain times, before more intensive shipping channels were dredged through the area. In modern times, the question of the bridge's origin has sparked political, religious, and scientific controversy. Proposals to dredge the area for shipping routes have met resistance from those who consider the structure sacred, while scientists continue to debate its formation in academic journals and popular science platforms alike. Satellite imagery, ground surveys, core sampling, and even diver-led underwater explorations have been launched to better understand the bridge's composition and history. Still, no definitive consensus has been reached. Perhaps this is fitting. Perhaps Adam's Bridge exists precisely to challenge our categories, to remind us that history, like the structure itself, is often a blurred line between land and sea, between fact and faith, between what is natural and what is made. As we peer into the mystery of this bridge, we are not just seeking to understand rocks and sand. We are seeking to understand ourselves, our origins, our stories, and our capacity to reshape the world around us. In the pages that follow, we will examine the bridge from multiple angles, its geographic and geological characteristics, the mythological stories surrounding its creation, the scientific investigations both supporting and opposing its artificial origins, and ultimately the broader implications of its existence. Whether a marvel of nature or a forgotten feat of engineering, Adam's Bridge invites us to reconsider the boundaries of ancient possibility and to reimagine what we think we know about humanity's earliest footprints. Great. Here's the next section expanded into a 1,200-1,300 word paragraph in the same polished style. The geographic marvel anomalous structure or natural wonder, spanning over 30 kilometers between the Indian subcontinent and Sri Lanka. Adam's Bridge, or Rama's Bridge, depending on one's perspective, is one of the most peculiar and visually captivating features of the Indian Ocean's shallow waters. Its serpentine path, weaving through the Gulf of Mannar and the Palk Strait, appears remarkably consistent in both width and orientation. The bridge comprises a chain of sandbanks, coral reefs, and limestone shoals, many of which are just below or barely above sea level. What makes this formation so intriguing is not only its scale and location, but the unignorable impression it gives, particularly when viewed from above, of deliberate construction or at least a purposeful pattern suggesting an ancient design or intention long lost to history. From a strictly geographic standpoint, Adam's Bridge is situated in a tectonically stable region, bordered by the Indian Plate, which moves gradually northward toward the Eurasian Plate. The region has not been historically known for volcanic activity or major earthquakes, which makes the formation of such a long, narrow, and relatively straight structure even more curious. In most natural scenarios, coastlines and underwater features tend to evolve in irregular forms, governed by erosion sedimentation, ocean currents, and the whims of geological time. Yet here, between India's Pamban Island and Sri Lanka's Mannar Island, lies a formation whose straightness and continuity defy the typical randomness of nature's work. Satellite imagery brought this phenomenon into greater public consciousness in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, when NASA released photos from Landsat missions showing a continuous ribbon of light-toned material cutting across the sea. Many observers were stunned. These images revealed a causeway-like path connecting the two nations, a striking visual representation of a story long relegated to myth. While NASA itself never declared the structure man-made, the public reaction was explosive, especially in India. Religious groups, historical revisionists, and alternative historians saw the images as validation of long-held beliefs. Meanwhile, scientists and skeptics urged caution, emphasizing the need for geological surveys and sediment analysis before drawing any conclusions about human involvement. Geological studies have attempted to explain Adam's Bridge as a natural consequence of ocean currents, coral growth, and the accumulation of sand over time. The Gulf of Mannar and Palk Strait are relatively shallow bodies of water, and the tidal dynamics between them could, over millennia, lead to the deposition of sediments in a roughly linear fashion. Coral reefs are also known to grow in aligned patterns under certain conditions, particularly where water depth and sunlight remain stable. These processes could theoretically account for the formation's general outline. However, even among geologists there remains a sense of puzzlement over the structure's extraordinary symmetry, consistency, and depth, and the overall alignment with terrestrial landmasses at both ends. One of the most striking features of Adam's Bridge is the uniformity of the shoal's elevation. Most sections are submerged only 1 to 3 meters beneath the surface, and some parts emerge above water during low tide. In earlier centuries, historical travelers and local inhabitants claimed that the bridge could be walked across on foot or on animal back, suggesting that its present semi-submerged state may be a result of relatively recent environmental changes. This accessibility would have had significant implications for ancient trade migration or even military expeditions, providing a convenient passage between two major cultural and ecological regions. This proximity between India and Sri Lanka and the existence of a potential physical link between the two may have influenced patterns of human settlement and cultural diffusion for thousands of years. Some historians have speculated that the early Dravidian peoples, along with the later Chola and Pandya kingdoms, could have used this bridge or its natural precursor to maintain contact with the island. While maritime trade routes also existed, a terrestrial connection, however precarious, would have offered strategic advantages during times of both peace and conflict. If the bridge is indeed partly natural, it could have served as a foundation for human modification, much like ancient civilizations that enhanced natural cave dwellings or riverbanks for their own use. Supporters of the man-made theory point to several anomalies in the structure's composition. Preliminary analyses have identified variations in the density and layering of the materials along the bridge's length. Some core samples have revealed a layer of compacted sand sitting atop what appear to be stones that do not match the surrounding seabed. In particular, a few of these stones resemble laterite and sandstone materials not commonly formed in underwater environments, but often used in ancient South Asian construction. The presence of such materials, especially when found in consistent intervals along the bridge, leads some to argue that they may have been transported and arranged by human hands. Adding to the mystery is the historical documentation of the area. Old maps, such as those drawn by Dutch cartographers in the 17th century and British naval officers in the 19th century, depict a continuous landmass or a ridge connecting India and Ceylon, as Sri Lanka was then called. These maps refer to the structure variously as Adam's Bridge, Ramancoil Bridge, or the Ridge. The fact that these terms were used interchangeably suggests that the formation was not considered a simple sandbank, but a notable and perhaps functional geographical feature. Moreover, British engineers in the colonial era debated the possibility of restoring the bridge as a permanent land connection, further testifying to its perceived structural coherence. Despite its name, the bridge is not entirely continuous in the modern sense. There are breaks between some of the shoals, and the entire stretch is prone to shifting due to tidal action and sediment movement. This has led critics of the man-made theory to argue that any appearance of uniformity is coincidental. However, this critique fails to account for the broader context, namely the capacity of ancient humans to work with nature rather than against it to create hybrid structures. Many ancient causeways and embankments incorporated natural features into their design, using marshes, existing ridges, and rock outcrops to reduce labor and material costs. It is not inconceivable that early builders, whether mythical or historical, could have adopted a similar strategy with Adam's Bridge. What further supports this idea is the bridge's strategic orientation. It does not veer randomly across the sea, but connects two significant land points directly, Rameswaram in India and Talaimana in Sri Lanka. These locations are not arbitrary. Both hold religious and historical significance. Rameswaram is one of Hinduism's holiest pilgrimage sites, associated with the Ramayana and Lord Shiva, while the Manar district has long been a cultural crossroads. The possibility that a causeway once existed to facilitate movement between these two sacred and strategic centers lends additional weight to the idea of intentional human planning. Yet the debate is far from resolved. Geologists continue to study the strait, utilizing modern technologies such as sonar imaging, sediment, stratigraphy, and underwater archaeology. Meanwhile, governments and religious organizations debate the cultural heritage status of the bridge. The Indian Supreme Court has even weighed in on the matter, at one point halting a proposed shipping canal project, the Sethu Samudram project, that would have dredged parts of the bridge to allow large vessels to pass through. The opposition to this plan was not merely environmental. It was also deeply cultural and spiritual, rooted in the belief that the bridge is not just stone and sand, but a sacred relic of divine action. In the final analysis, Adam's bridge straddles multiple worlds, the physical and the mythical, the natural and the artificial, the forgotten past and the living present. Whether formed by millennia of oceanic movement or assembled stone by ancient hands, it remains one of the planet's most compelling and mysterious formations. As our tools for investigation improve, so too does the potential to uncover deeper truths about the bridge's origins. But no matter the outcome, Adam's bridge will continue to inspire wonder precisely because it resists simple explanation. The myth of Rama's bridge and the epic of the Ramayana to millions of Hindus across the world. Adam's bridge is not merely a curious land formation. It is Rama's bridge, Rama Setu, the sacred causeway described in the Ramayana, one of the most revered and foundational epics in Indian civilization. According to the mythic narrative, this bridge was not a product of nature, but of divinely assisted engineering. Built by an army of Vanaras, supernatural monkey-like beings, led by the devoted Hanuman, it was constructed to help Lord Rama cross the sea to Lanka, modern-day Sri Lanka, in order to rescue his abducted wife Sita from the demon king Ravana. The myth is more than a heroic tale. It is a spiritual roadmap, a metaphysical war cry, and a powerful symbol of faith triumphing over evil discipline, over chaos, and dharma over adharma. The Ramayana, attributed to the sage Valmiki, is an epic poem spanning over 24,000 verses. Composed in Sanskrit and translated into numerous regional languages, it has shaped Indian consciousness for more than 2 millennia. In the narrative, Rama, an avatar of the god Vishnu, is exiled to the forest with his wife Sita and his brother Lakshmana. After Sita is abducted by Ravana and taken to Lanka, Rama is consumed by grief and duty. He raises an army of forest dwellers and divine beings, ultimately constructing a bridge to cross the sea and confront the evil king. The construction of Rama Setu is not a minor detail. It occupies entire cantos of the epic, emphasizing the miraculous nature of the event and the spiritual unity of man, animal, and God. The legend says that the Vanaras, under the command of Nala, a gifted architect, used stones and boulders inscribed with Rama's name. These stones miraculously floated on water, defying gravity and nature solely due to the divine name written on them. This poetic touch not only adds a supernatural element to the tale, but has also become a focal point of devotion in Hindu practice. Pilgrims to Rameswaram and Dhanushkodi often speak of floating stones seen in the region, pointing to local examples as proof of the epic's veracity. Some temples even preserve such stones as relics. But what is most important about this myth is not whether it literally happened in the geological sense. Instead, it is the moral and spiritual architecture of the story that has given the bridge such significance. Rama's bridge is the embodiment of effort fused with faith, of building a path toward justice and righteousness, even when oceans separate us from our goal. In this symbolic sense, Rama Setu transcends history. It becomes a universal metaphor for the arduous journey one must undertake to rescue what is sacred truth, love, honor, or the soul itself. Culturally, the bridge and its mythic origin have influenced Indian identity in ways both subtle and monumental. Artists, poets, and playwrights for centuries have drawn inspiration from the Ramayana, portraying the bridge not just as a military engineering feat, but as a mystical manifestation of divine will. The architecture of temple gateways, the layout of certain pilgrimages, and even modern nationalist rhetoric have occasionally invoked Rama's journey as an ideal of moral conquest and spiritual duty. In this way, the myth has never remained locked in ancient texts. It lives and breathes through cultural expression, civic memory, and personal belief. Over the years, various reinterpretations of the Ramayana across regions have introduced nuanced variations of the story, but the bridge remains a constant. In Tamil, versions like Kamba Ramayanam, or in Southeast Asian renditions such as Ramakane, Thailand, and Rayamka, Cambodia, the idea of building a path to overcome evil is preserved. This consistent symbolic presence across cultures suggests that the myth of Rama's bridge appeals to something archetypal in the human psyche, the urge to cross the impossible, to reach the unreachable, guided by faith and collective purpose. In modern India, the bridge has also become a flashpoint in debates about history, religion, and science. While some political and religious groups assert the historicity of Rama's bridge and demand that it be protected as a sacred site, others, particularly secular historians and scientists, call for evidence-based interpretations. The controversy reached its peak during debates surrounding the Sethusamudram shipping canal project, which aimed to dredge the area for commercial shipping routes. The proposed destruction or alteration of parts of the bridge sparked national outrage from devotees and heritage activists who argued that such an act would be tantamount to erasing a divine monument. Petitions were filed, political campaigns were launched, and the matter even reached India's Supreme Court. This intersection of myth and modernity reveals something deeper. The myth of Rama's bridge is not simply about the past. It is also about the present and future. It is a battle over meaning. On one side stands a scientific desire for utility, efficiency, and verifiable truth. On the other stands a civilizational memory interwoven with spiritual reverence and ancestral pride that sees the bridge as a sacred bond between the mortal and the divine. It is in this liminal space that the myth of Rama's bridge finds its most powerful voice, not as a literal archaeological claim, but as a reminder that human stories, when rooted in the sacred, can shape destiny just as much as any blueprint or excavation. Interestingly, even beyond Hinduism, the bridge holds spiritual connotations. Islamic tradition names it Adam's Bridge, based on the belief that Adam, the first man, used this land connection after being cast from paradise to descend into Sri Lanka and make his way to the rest of the world. While vastly different in theological details, the symbolism aligns. The bridge is seen as a divine passage, a physical route used in humanity's origin story. This dual mythic significance in both Hindu and Islamic lore adds a profound layer to its symbolic gravitas. It becomes a spiritual highway, a cross-religious structure that connects not just lands, but beliefs. Thus, Adam's Bridge or Rama's Bridge is more than a physical anomaly or geological curiosity. It is a living myth, one that continues to echo in sermons, political rallies, philosophical debates, and personal pilgrimages. Whether or not we accept the tale of Hanuman leaping oceans or the stones floating through the power of Rama's name, the enduring power of this myth lies in its capacity to inspire awe and action, reverence and resistance, memory and meaning. In the end, the myth of Rama's Bridge is not about proving or disproving a miracle. It is about the soul's journey to build bridges where none exist. In a world torn by divisions, geographical, cultural, ideological, the story of Rama's passage across the sea stands as an eternal archetype that what separates us can be crossed not just with science, but with devotion, not just with stone, but with spirit. It is this mythic foundation layered with meaning, memory, and metaphor that keeps the bridge alive not only in the waters of the Indian Ocean, but in the hearts of those who believe. Here is the next expanded section of 1,200–1,300 words, geological studies and controversies. Natural, man-made, or both? The question of whether Adam's Bridge is a natural formation or a man-made structure has sparked one of the most fascinating and polarizing scientific and cultural debates in South Asia. At the heart of this controversy is a complex web of geology, archaeology, mythology, politics, and faith. Scientists, historians, spiritual leaders, and politicians have all weighed in, each offering divergent interpretations based on vastly different assumptions. Some see it as a sedimentary marvel, sculpted over millennia by tides and shifting sands, while others argue it is an artificial construct, evidence of an ancient engineering feat that corroborates the mythic account of Rama's Bridge in the Ramayana. Geologically, Adam's Bridge lies within a zone of dynamic coastal processes. It is made up of a chain of limestone shoals, sandbars, and coral reefs that stretch from Dhanushkodi in India to Talaimana in Sri Lanka. Satellite images, especially those from NASA in the early 2000s, brought renewed public interest in the formation, as they clearly showed the bridge-like structure spanning approximately 48 kilometers across the shallow waters of the Pelk Strait. These images, visually striking and suggestive, quickly made their way into news articles, YouTube documentaries, and devotional literature. To many, they seemed to confirm what the Ramayana had described centuries ago. Yet, scientific interpretation of the data tells a more nuanced story. Several studies by the Geological Survey of India (GSI), the Archaeological Survey of India (ASI), and independent marine geologists suggest that the structure is a result of natural sedimentation processes. Over tens of thousands of years, sand, silt, and coral accumulated in the relatively shallow and turbulent waters between India and Sri Lanka, forming sandbars and shoals that eventually linked the two land masses in a discontinuous chain. These formations are not uncommon in such coastal environments. Similar natural ridges and tombolos, sandbars connecting two land masses, can be found in other parts of the world as well. However, it is precisely the regularity and linear alignment of Adam's bridge that gives pause to many researchers and lay observers alike. Unlike randomly scattered natural sandbars, this formation has an astonishingly straight trajectory. That has led some to propose that what we are seeing is not merely natural, but potentially the remnants of an ancient causeway, one that may have been modified, stabilized, or even constructed with human intervention thousands of years ago. This idea has gained traction in both scientific and pseudo-scientific circles, especially among researchers open to re-examining historical records through interdisciplinary lenses. One study published by Dr. Badrinarayanan, a former director of the Geological Survey of India, is frequently cited in this regard. He claimed that core samples taken from the region revealed layers of compacted sand lying beneath marine sediments, suggesting human placement rather than natural deposition. Additionally, he noted that the stones appeared to be resting on a layer of loose sand, which geologically shouldn't support such weight unless placed intentionally. According to his view, the bridge could date back over 7,000 years, possibly corresponding to the early Holocene period when sea levels were lower and human civilizations were just emerging in complexity. Other scientists caution against jumping to conclusions. They argue that the data are incomplete and that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Moreover, they point out that coral growth can create misleading formations that appear artificial. Coastal currents, tectonic activity, and climate changes could all play roles in shaping a bridge-like structure without any human assistance. In this view, the burden of proof lies heavily on those who claim intentional construction. A few stones that appear aligned or core samples with ambiguous data are not sufficient, they say, to override the prevailing consensus of natural formation. The debate took a sharp turn into political territory in the early 2000s with the proposed Sethusamudram Shipping Canal project, a multi-billion-dollar initiative by the Indian government to create a navigable sea route through the shallow straits of Adam's Bridge. The plan involved dredging parts of the bridge to allow cargo ships to bypass the longer route around Sri Lanka. While the economic rationale was clear, the religious and cultural backlash was immediate and intense. Hindu groups protested what they saw as a desecration of a sacred monument, demanding that the government protect Rama's Bridge as a national heritage site. Court cases ensued. Petitions were filed to halt the project on the grounds that the bridge was not just a geological feature, but a religious relic. The Archaeological Survey of India submitted an affidavit stating there was no historical evidence proving the bridge was man-made or that Rama had built it. This triggered a political firestorm. Accusations flew. The affidavit was withdrawn. Protests erupted across India. What had started as a scientific and infrastructural issue quickly transformed into a culture war, highlighting the deep entanglement of myth identity and science in Indian society. The public perception of Adam's Bridge was forever changed. Even those who were previously unaware of the formation came to see it as a symbol either of Hindu pride and civilizational glory, or of superstition and anti-scientific thinking, depending on one's ideological orientation. The controversy brought to the surface a broader question: can science and myth coexist without one invalidating the other? Is it possible that Adam's Bridge is both a natural formation and a cultural monument shaped by nature, but revered and perhaps even subtly altered by human hands? Some contemporary scholars and philosophers argue for a middle path. They suggest that the distinction between natural and man-made is not always as rigid as it seems. In many indigenous and ancient traditions, human activity is seen as part of the natural order, not separate from it. In this sense, even if the bridge began as a natural formation, the fact that it was imbued with meaning used by travelers and perhaps stabilized or extended by ancient peoples might justify viewing it as a cultural artifact. This approach doesn't necessarily validate the literal events of the Ramayana, but it does open the door to a deeper understanding of how landscape and myth co-create each other. There's also the philosophical dimension. The bridge may not need to be entirely artificial to serve its mythic role. Like many religious relics, its value lies not in geological precision, but in symbolic resonance. The argument then becomes less about what the bridge is, and more about what it means. It is a threshold, a liminal zone where history meets legend, where belief confronts empiricism, and where the past still ripples into the present. To reduce it to merely rock and coral is to miss the psychic and cultural bridge it continues to offer millions. From an archaeological standpoint, there's room for cautious curiosity. The region has yet to be exhaustively explored using the latest technologies such as ground-penetrating radar, underwater LiDAR, or high-resolution sonar mapping. A full-scale interdisciplinary study combining oceanography, archaeology, mythology, and history has yet to be conducted in a transparent, peer-reviewed manner. Such a project could shed light not only on Adam's Bridge, but on the broader history of early seafaring civilizations in the Indian Ocean basin. In summary, the geological debate surrounding Adam's Bridge is not simply about rocks and sandbars. It is a reflection of deeper tensions in the way modern societies wrestle with heritage belief and identity. Whether ultimately determined to be a wholly natural feature, a partially man-made construction, or something in between, the bridge challenges us to expand our definitions of what counts as real. Science can tell us how the formation came to be, but myth tells us why it matters. And somewhere between the sediment layers and the scriptures, between sonar readings and sacred chants, lies a story that is still being written. One that bridges not just continents, but the human desire to connect the seen and the unseen. Political and religious implications in modern India. A battle for narrative and identity. Adam's Bridge, also known as Rama's Bridge or Ram Setu, is far more than a geological structure or a point of religious interest. In modern India, it has become a symbol of a deeper cultural, political, and religious tension, one that reflects the nation's ongoing struggle with its identity. The debate surrounding the nature and meaning of the bridge has shifted from scientific curiosity and devotional reverence to a fierce battleground of ideological conflicts. At its core, this debate represents a powerful collision between secularism and religious nationalism, development and preservation, empirical science, and sacred myth. The rise of Hindu nationalism in Indian politics has played a central role in amplifying the cultural significance of Ram Setu. The Bharatiya Janata Party (BJP), which has positioned itself as the political representative of India's Hindu majority, has long emphasized the restoration and preservation of Hindu symbols, stories, and sites. Within this ideological framework, the Ramayana is not just literature, it is sacred history. Thus, if Ram built a bridge to Lanka, then that bridge must be preserved, honored, and recognized as a national treasure. This sentiment is not merely rhetorical. It translates into policies, legal actions, and public discourse that seeks to assert Hindu identity in the national narrative. When the Sethusamudram shipping canal project was proposed in the early 2000s, the BJP and its allied organizations, such as the Vishwa Hindu Parishad (VHP), led massive protests against any plan that involved cutting through or damaging the bridge. They argued that this would be tantamount to desecrating a sacred heritage site, a direct affront to the religious sentiments of millions of Hindus. On the other side of the spectrum, secular and left-leaning political groups, along with many scientists and scholars, saw this opposition as an obstruction to development and a politicization of myth. They argued that while religious sentiments are important, they should not dictate national infrastructure projects. India, as a secular democracy, must base its decisions on scientific evidence, economic feasibility, and rational planning. According to this view, treating mythology as literal history could open the door to a host of regressive policies rooted in faith-based narratives rather than evidence-based reasoning. The legal arena became the stage for this confrontation. In 2007, during a court case involving the Sethusamudram project, the Archaeological Survey of India (ASI) submitted an affidavit stating there was no scientific evidence to prove that Adam's bridge was man-made or that it was constructed by Rama. This sparked an immediate political firestorm. Hindu nationalist groups accused the ASI and the ruling United Progressive Alliance (UPA) government of insulting Hindu beliefs. Massive protests ensued. The affidavit was later withdrawn, but the damage was done. A line had been drawn in the sand, quite literally. This moment became a turning point in the broader cultural war over India's heritage. Ram Setu was no longer just a curious geological formation. It had become a symbol of resistance against what many perceived as the erasure of Hindu identity by secular forces. For Hindu nationalists, acknowledging the bridge as a divine creation of Lord Rama served to legitimize their larger project of cultural revivalism. For secularists, conceding to such demands threatened to blur the lines between religion and governance, weakening India's pluralistic foundations. Television debates, political speeches, and social media platforms turned into echo chambers for this polarized discourse. Documentaries were produced on both sides, some claiming to show archaeological proof of an ancient bridge built by Rama's army, while others debunked such claims using scientific data. Even international voices weighed in. Some Western scholars criticized the politicization of myth, while others admired the resilience of Indian traditions in maintaining cultural memory over millennia. This divide reflects a larger question that haunts many modern nations. How do we reconcile myth and history in a multicultural scientific age? Can a secular democracy still honor sacred symbols without endorsing a particular religious belief? Or does the institutional validation of myths risk turning history into ideology? The implications go beyond Adam's bridge itself. Similar debates have erupted across India over the historicity of temples and mosques, religious festivals, language policies, and school curricula. Each of these conflicts carries the weight of centuries of cultural memory, colonial disruption, and post-independence realignment. In this context, Ram Setu serves as both a case study and a metaphor for the larger crisis of Indian identity, torn between its mythic past and its modern aspirations. One cannot ignore the emotional and psychological dimension of this debate. For many Hindus, especially in rural and traditional communities, the Ramayana is not fiction, it is lived truth. It shapes moral values, family roles, and community ethics. To tell them that the bridge described in their holy text does not exist, or that it is just a sandbar formed by tides, is not merely an academic correction, it is a personal affront. It denies the reality of their spiritual worldview. And when such corrections come from government agencies or scientific institutions, they are perceived not as neutral assessments, but as ideological attacks by a disconnected elite. This is why the BJP and its allies have found fertile ground for mobilization. By positioning themselves as protectors of the faith, they tap into deep reservoirs of cultural memory and emotional resonance. Ram Setu becomes a rallying cry, not just to preserve a structure, but to reclaim a civilization. In doing so, they link the ancient with the modern myth, with nationhood and spirituality, with political agency. But this strategy is not without its risks. Over-politicization of religious symbols can lead to exclusion, marginalization, and conflict. India is home to vast religious diversity: Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, Jains, Buddhists, and countless other spiritual traditions coexist within its borders. When the state takes sides in theological debates or promotes one version of cultural memory over others, it undermines the very pluralism that defines India's strength. Ram Setu, while sacred to many, cannot become a symbol that alienates or erases others. Moreover, the focus on symbolic battles often distracts from pressing social and economic issues. While political parties argue over the origins of a bridge, many communities near the Palk Strait continue to suffer from poverty, lack of infrastructure, and environmental degradation. The region is also ecologically fragile. Dredging or disrupting its marine ecosystem, whether for shipping or political theatrics, could have long-lasting consequences for biodiversity and local livelihoods. Thus, the question becomes, are we protecting Ram's legacy or sacrificing real lives at the altar of symbolism? There is, however, another way forward, one that seeks integration rather than division. Imagine a framework where Adam's Bridge is acknowledged as both a geological wonder and a cultural monument, a place where scientific research coexists with spiritual pilgrimage, a heritage site that invites both geologists and devotees. Such a vision would require humility on all sides. Scientists would need to respect the cultural power of myth, and believers would need to accept the fluid boundaries between faith and fact. Some efforts have already begun in this direction. Cultural preservationists have called for Ram Setu to be declared a national heritage site, not because it was definitively built by Rama, but because it holds immense cultural, spiritual, and symbolic value. Meanwhile, scholars have proposed multidisciplinary studies of the region that combine archaeology, geology, literature, and anthropology. These approaches avoid the binary of true versus false, and instead ask deeper questions. How have stories shaped the landscape? How has the landscape shaped our stories? In conclusion, the political and religious implications of Adam's Bridge are a reflection of India's broader challenges in navigating identity, memory, and modernity. Ram Setu is not just a line of rocks in the ocean. It is a mirror that reflects the hopes, fears, and contradictions of a nation. Whether seen as the handiwork of an ancient deity, the gift of natural processes, or a bit of both, it carries a weight far beyond its physical presence. And in honoring that weight, India may find not just answers to a bridge, but a path toward a more inclusive future. Satellite imagery and modern technological insights, the intersection of faith, fact, and forensics. In the ongoing discourse surrounding Adam's Bridge, known reverently by many as Ramset II, one of the most significant developments in the modern era has been the use of advanced technological tools, especially satellite imagery. These images have not only reignited public interest in the bridge, but have also brought the discussion into the domain of forensic analysis, remote sensing, and digital archaeology. With high-resolution imaging from organizations such as NASA and the Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO Adams Bridge has become one of the most closely examined and hotly debated landforms in the world. But what precisely do these satellite images reveal, and how do they shape our understanding of the boundary between myth and material evidence? To begin with, it's important to clarify what the satellite images actually show. From space, Adam's Bridge appears as a thin, sinuous chain of shoals and sandbanks stretching from Dhanushkodi near the southern tip of India to Talaimana in Sri Lanka. The total length is around 30 kilometers, and in several places the bridge appears just barely submerged under the shallow waters of the Palk Strait. The clarity of its form, arching across the sea in a seemingly intentional path, has led many to speculate about its origins. Was this a natural formation, an ancient land bridge, or perhaps something crafted by human hands millennia ago? NASA's satellite images in the early 2000s played a key role in bringing this question to global attention. Although NASA officially stated that their imaging did not confirm any man-made structure, many Hindu groups interpreted the visual evidence as corroboration of the Ramayana's narrative. The bridge appeared too straight, too continuous, and too linear to be purely accidental. For the faithful, this was not just a coincidence, it was cosmic proof. However, the scientific community took a different stance. Geologists and marine researchers argued that the sandbanks known locally as ramps or shoals were part of a natural process. The Palk Strait is a shallow body of water with depths often less than 1.5 meters, and it is geologically young, formed through the interaction of tides, sediment deposition, and tectonic uplift. Over centuries, coral reefs, silt from river discharge, and the currents of the Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea have shaped this chain of shoals. From this perspective, the bridge is a natural phenomenon, albeit one that has inspired awe and reverence for generations. Yet the question remains, can technology bridge the gap between these two interpretations? One of the most promising tools in this domain is remote sensing. Through techniques such as multispectral imaging and ground-penetrating radar, GPR researchers can now examine the subsurface composition of landforms. These technologies allow scientists to see beneath the layers of sand and water without disturbing the sight. Several studies have used these methods to map the bridge's sediment layers, uncovering intriguing anomalies. Some layers appear to contain materials inconsistent with surrounding geological formations, suggesting possible human intervention or transportation of materials. For example, certain studies have identified deposits of calcareous sandstone and coral that seem to have been laid over a natural sand foundation. To some researchers, this implies that natural elements may have been manipulated or aligned by human action. However, without definitive artifacts such as tools, inscriptions, or engineered supports, Such interpretations remain speculative. Another valuable insight comes from bathymetric surveys, essentially underwater topographical maps. These surveys have revealed that the elevations along the bridge's path are unusually uniform. In several places, the seafloor rises to meet the sandbanks, forming a remarkably consistent ridge. This leads some to theorize that the bridge could have been a land connection during an earlier geological period, possibly used by ancient humans or animals for migration. If that were the case, it would explain both the natural structure and its association with human stories. This idea supports a middle ground theory. Adam's Bridge may have started as a natural formation that was later utilized or enhanced by early human civilizations. One of the most frequently cited arguments in support of human involvement is the sheer scale and linearity of the structure. Critics of the natural formation theory argue that such a long and straight alignment of shoals is statistically improbable without some intelligent intervention. They also point to cultural practices in ancient India that involved sophisticated engineering, as seen in the construction of step wells, irrigation systems, and temples. Could the builders of such marvels also have shaped the ocean itself? Despite these theories, skeptics emphasize the lack of direct archaeological evidence. Satellite images, while compelling, do not confirm human activity. They are visual cues that require interpretation. Without artifacts, inscriptions, or carbon-dated building materials, the structure cannot be definitively labeled as man-made. It's a dilemma that reveals both the power and the limitation of modern technology. It can capture breathtaking images, map topography, and analyze materials, but it cannot answer cultural questions without context. However, this does not stop public sentiment from running with the visual narrative. In an age of digital media, images hold extraordinary persuasive power. The visual symbolism of a bridge stretching across the sea resonates with deep psychological and cultural archetypes, the crossing over, the connection between lands and people, the passage between worlds. It is no wonder, then, that the satellite imagery of Adam's Bridge has become viral, circulated widely on social media, and used in everything from political campaigns to spiritual documentaries. In India, these images have become tools of cultural affirmation. News outlets, religious organizations, and influencers often use the satellite pictures to suggest that science is finally catching up with ancient wisdom. This framing appeals to a nationalistic pride in India's ancient past, a sense that the great epics are not just allegorical tales, but historical records. In this sense, satellite technology has become a paradoxical ally of faith, even though the scientific institutions producing the images remain neutral or skeptical. The images themselves are interpreted in a way that validates belief. Furthermore, technology has enabled the democratization of evidence. In earlier times, archaeological discoveries were limited to academic journals or museum displays. Today, anyone with internet access can view high-resolution images of Adam's Bridge, read geological reports, and form their own conclusions. This has led to a form of crowdsourced archaeology where citizen researchers use Google Earth drone footage and publicly available data to propose their own theories. While this opens up new forms of engagement, it also introduces challenges without peer review and methodological rigor. Such interpretations can spread misinformation or pseudoscience. Another intriguing technological development is the use of 3D reconstruction and virtual reality (VR) to recreate what Adam's Bridge may have looked like in ancient times. These digital models, often used in educational documentaries and museum exhibits, offer immersive experiences that blend fact with narrative. Whether showing monkey armies building the bridge or simulating how a natural landmass might have been traversed in the past, these reconstructions serve to captivate the imagination. They do not settle the debate, but they do enrich it, allowing people to visualize the myths and science in tandem. Despite all these advancements, it's worth asking, what are we really seeking in these images? Are we trying to prove the existence of a historical Rama, or are we looking for something deeper? A sense that our ancient stories are still alive in the land. Perhaps the obsession with satellite imagery is less about the data and more about the desire for continuity. In a fast-changing world where traditions are often eroded by modernity, the image of a sacred bridge visible from space offers a powerful symbol of permanence. In conclusion, the application of modern technology to the study of Adam's Bridge reveals both the potential and the pitfalls of using science to explore matters of faith. While satellite images, remote sensing, and digital forensics provide valuable data, they also carry the weight of interpretation. For believers, they are visual confirmations of divine architecture. For scientists, they are geological puzzles shaped by natural forces. For the broader public, they are symbols mirroring our collective longing for connection, meaning, and continuity. And perhaps in this intersection of faith and fact of pixels and pilgrimage lies the true bridge we are trying to build. Ram Setu as a symbol of collective memory and identity, bridging mythology. Nationalism and cultural continuity. Adam's Bridge, or Ram Setu, is far more than a geological formation or a subject of scientific inquiry. It is a living symbol etched into the spiritual, cultural, and emotional psyche of millions of people, particularly in the Indian subcontinent. Its importance cannot be adequately explained by referring solely to sandbanks or satellite images. Instead, its enduring resonance lies in its function as a cultural artifact, one that embodies collective memory, nurtures identity, and unites people across regions, languages, and even generations. The symbolic dimension of Ram Setu provides a profound example of how mythology, faith, and historical consciousness coalesce into something far more powerful than the sum of its parts. To understand the symbolic significance of Ram Setu, one must return to its mythological roots. In the epic Ramayana, composed by the sage Valmiki and retold countless times over millennia, the bridge is constructed by Lord Rama's Vanara monkey army to cross into Lanka and rescue Sita from the demon king Ravana. This story, while mythological in character, functions not merely as a tale of heroism and divine justice. It serves as a spiritual allegory of perseverance, devotion, and moral victory over evil. For countless Hindus, this bridge is not only real, but sacred, built through divine will and courage. What makes Ram Setu more than just a feature in a religious story is its role in shaping collective memory. Collective memory is not simply about remembering facts or dates. It is about preserving the shared stories that define a group's values, identity, and vision of the world. The bridge becomes a point of reference, a sacred geography around which generations have oriented their sense of history and self. It is remembered not through textbooks or archaeological digs, but through oral traditions, religious festivals, plays, films, and family stories passed down over centuries. Each retelling reinforces the idea that Ram Setu is a part of one's cultural inheritance, something deeply intertwined with who they are and where they come from. This dynamic becomes especially powerful in the context of India's vast and diverse population. In a country with over 1 billion people speaking dozens of languages and following multiple faiths, symbols like Ram Setu act as anchors of unity. The Ramayana is not confined to any one region. It has been adapted into Tamil, Telugu, Bengali, Marathi, Hindi, and other linguistic traditions, each adding local flavor to the story, but retaining the central role of the bridge. The physical geography of Ram Setu thus serves as a pan-Indian symbol, linking not just India and Sri Lanka geographically, but Indians culturally and emotionally. Yet the role of Ram Setu does not stop at culture and spirituality. It has also become a powerful political and nationalistic symbol. In modern India, particularly at the 21st century, Ram Setu has been invoked in debates over national identity, historical ownership, and cultural pride. Some political parties and organizations, especially those aligned with Hindu nationalism, have used the symbol of the bridge to assert the historicity of the Ramayana and to reclaim India's ancient spiritual heritage as literal truth rather than allegory. This politicization was most visible during the controversy over the Sethusamudram shipping canal project, an initiative that proposed dredging a navigational channel through the Palk Strait. The proposed path would have required breaking through parts of Adams Bridge. The project, while framed as an economic initiative to facilitate shipping between India's east and west coasts, quickly ignited a firestorm of protests. Opponents argued that the project would destroy a sacred monument tied to national and religious identity. For many, this was not just about environmental conservation or economic practicality. It was about preserving the very soul of Indian civilization. In this context, Ram Setu evolved from a religious symbol to a battleground for cultural legitimacy. Scientific debates over the bridge's origin were no longer purely academic. They became entangled with questions of faith identity and national pride. The argument that the bridge is just a natural formation was seen by some as dismissive, even disrespectful to a tradition that had nurtured the bridge as sacred for thousands of years. Conversely, defenders of scientific integrity worried that myth was being allowed to override rational infrastructure planning. This tension highlights a deeper question: what role should cultural memory play in shaping public policy? And can a society honor its sacred geography without compromising on scientific or secular principles? In the case of Ram Setu, this challenge is not easily resolved, but it has led to greater awareness of how deeply people's identities are rooted in their sacred landscapes. Importantly, the symbolic value of Ram Setu also extends beyond religion and politics into the realm of cultural continuity. In an era of globalization and rapid change, symbols like Ram Setu serve as touchstones of stability. They offer a sense of rootedness in a world increasingly marked by transience and disconnection. For diaspora communities living abroad, stories of Ram Setu act as bridges of memory, connecting them with their ancestral past, spiritual heritage, and collective imagination. Moreover, the bridge has also become a narrative symbol in contemporary media and literature. From television serials to animated films, documentaries to historical novels, Ram Setu continues to be reimagined in modern formats. These retellings often blend ancient myth with current themes such as environmental preservation, technological marvels, or the quest for historical truth. As a result, the bridge functions not only as a relic of the past, but as a canvas upon which each generation paints its own understanding of faith, identity, and purpose. The preservation of such symbols becomes especially crucial in the face of cultural erosion. As modernity accelerates, traditional stories and sacred geographies are often marginalized or commodified. Places like Ram Setu are at risk of being reduced to tourist spots or political slogans rather than revered as living symbols of cultural imagination. Recognizing Ram Setu as a part of collective memory means acknowledging its intangible value, its power to inspire, unify, and define a people's story. There is also a philosophical dimension to Ram Setu's symbolic role. The bridge, by its very nature, connects two lands, India and Lanka, the material and the mythical, the present and the eternal. As a symbol, it suggests the possibility of crossing over from ignorance to knowledge, from division to unity, from suffering to salvation. This symbolic crossing is central to many spiritual traditions. In Buddhist terms, one might call it a movement across the samsaric sea. In Hindu terms, it represents the triumph of Dharma over adharma. In psychological terms, it may symbolize the integration of fragmented parts of the self. Thus, Ram Setu is not just a structure or story, it is an archetype. It represents the universal longing to transcend barriers, to unite what is divided, to remember what has been forgotten. In this sense, the bridge is eternal, not because it is made of indestructible stone or coral, but because it lives in the collective soul of a civilization. In conclusion, Ram Setu stands as a powerful emblem of collective memory and identity. It defies easy categorization. It is simultaneously a myth and a physical structure, a religious symbol and a geopolitical flashpoint, a cultural legacy and a modern controversy. Yet this very complexity is what gives it life. Like all great symbols, it contains multitudes. It invites each generation to ask anew, what does this bridge mean to us today? Is it a story to believe in, a heritage to protect, a metaphor to live by? Or perhaps it is all of these woven together by the threads of memory, identity, and the human longing to belong to something greater than ourselves. The geological debate. Natural wonder or man-made marvel. The question of whether Adam's bridge, known to many as Ram Setu, is a natural formation or a man-made marvel, has intrigued scientists, historians, theologians, and the general public alike for decades. This debate is not just academic, it sits at the intersection of geology, mythology, nationalism, and faith. At its core lies a fundamental inquiry about how we interpret our world. Do we see it solely through the lens of scientific observation, or do we also make space for the sacred and symbolic in our understanding of Earth's most mysterious features? From a geological perspective, Adam's bridge is a formation of shoals, sandbanks and limestone ridges that stretches approximately 30 kilometers, roughly 18 miles, between Pamban Island in Tamil Nadu, India, and Mannar Island in Sri Lanka. Satellite images clearly reveal a curving, almost linear chain of islets and shallow underwater ridges that form a near-continuous path across the Polk Strait. The structure is unusual, so linear and well-defined that it begs for closer scrutiny. Many geologists consider the formation to be a natural one shaped over thousands of years by the interplay of ocean currents, sediment transport, and fluctuating sea levels. The region between India and Sri Lanka is relatively shallow, averaging about 1 to 10 meters in depth, which makes it a perfect basin for the slow accumulation of sand, coral, and silt. Over time, these deposits subjected to tidal flows and seasonal weather patterns could have coalesced into the string-like formation we see today. Geological theories explaining the creation of Adam's Bridge often refer to a phenomenon known as tombolo formation. A tombolo is a landform in which an island is attached to the mainland by a narrow piece of land, such as a spit or bar, often composed of sediment. This occurs when wave refraction and sediment transport deposit materials in the area, between the landmass and the island. Several examples of tombolos exist globally, such as Chesil Beach in England. The formation of Adam's Bridge may well be a large-scale example of this geological process. Furthermore, scientific studies involving carbon dating of corals and sand samples taken from the region have presented wide-ranging age estimates. Some findings suggest the submerged structures could be around 3,500 to 7,000 years old, while others propose even more ancient origins. These estimates, while not conclusive, place the formation comfortably within the timeline of known natural geological activity in the area. However, they do not definitively disprove human involvement in modifying or utilizing the structure, especially in a pre-modern era. On the other side of the debate are those who believe that Ram Setu is not just a quirk of nature, but a constructed, or at least engineered, path created by human or divine intervention as described in the Ramayana. This view is deeply embedded in the cultural consciousness of many Hindus, and is often presented as evidence that ancient Indian civilization possessed advanced engineering knowledge. Supporters of this perspective argue that the bridge's straightness, continuity, and alignment defy purely natural explanations. In 2002, NASA released satellite images that showed the bridge-like formation with striking clarity. Though NASA officials explicitly stated that they did not draw any conclusions about the structure's origin or age, the images were widely circulated by proponents of the man-made theory as visual proof of the Ramayana's historicity. These images continue to fuel the belief that the bridge must have been constructed, or at least enhanced, by ancient builders. Adding to this narrative are anecdotal accounts and folk traditions from local communities. For centuries, coastal fishermen and temple priests have referred to the area as Setubandha, or Rama's Bridge. Oral traditions passed down through generations describe the bridge as a sacred path built to aid Lord Rama's journey to Lanka. These stories are treated not as metaphors, but as literal historical accounts, providing a form of cultural evidence that science often struggles to quantify. Proponents of the man-made theory also point to the engineering plausibility of ancient civilizational efforts. They argue that civilizations such as those in the Indus Valley, Mesopotamia, and Egypt demonstrated remarkable skill in architecture and urban planning thousands of years ago. If these ancient societies could construct cities with drainage systems, granaries and temples, why not a causeway or bridge across shallow waters? There have even been modern claims of structural remains beneath the water, such as large stone blocks or wooden supports embedded in the sandbanks, suggesting that humans may have once enhanced or walked upon the formation. However, these claims are difficult to verify conclusively due to the challenges of underwater archaeology in a region that is constantly shifting due to tidal and seasonal influences. Nevertheless, most mainstream scientists remain cautious. They argue that human participation in shaping the bridge, while not impossible, lacks concrete archaeological evidence. Without tools, inscriptions, dwellings, or indisputable artifacts associated with the structure, the case for a man-made Ram Setu cannot be definitively proven. As one geologist noted, the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence, but extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. This scientific prudence, however, has not dampened public fascination. On the contrary, the mystery surrounding Adam's Bridge has only intensified its allure. The ambiguity allows for a plurality of interpretations. It becomes a Rorschach test of sorts. Those inclined toward rationalism see sediment and currents, while those steeped in faith see sacred architecture. This duality has led to significant controversy, especially in public discourse. In 2007, the Indian government, while defending the Sethu Samudram shipping canal project, submitted an affidavit to the Supreme Court suggesting that the bridge had no historical or archaeological significance. The affidavit, which referred to the Ramayana as a myth, sparked widespread outrage and was later withdrawn. The backlash demonstrated just how sensitive and symbolic the geological question of Ram Setu had become. Environmentalists have also entered the conversation, adding a new dimension to the debate. Regardless of its origin, Adam's Bridge is part of a delicate marine ecosystem. Dredging it could disrupt marine life, increase coastal erosion, and lead to unpredictable ecological consequences. As a result, environmental arguments often align, if unintentionally, with those seeking to preserve the bridge for religious or cultural reasons. In recent years, new scientific explorations have used more advanced techniques such as sonar imaging, radiocarbon dating, and geospatial analysis to understand the formation better. Some researchers have suggested that parts of the structure may have been walkable as recently as 500 years ago, and that sea levels in the region have risen significantly over the last few centuries. These findings, while inconclusive, offer intriguing support to theories of historical human interaction with the bridge, even if it wasn't originally built from scratch. Ultimately, the geological debate surrounding Ram Setu reflects a broader tension in how societies interpret evidence, myth, and meaning. Should natural formations with deep cultural significance be treated purely as scientific phenomena, or do they deserve special status because of the stories they embody? Can mythology and geology coexist without negating one another? In many ways, the bridge functions best when its mystery is preserved. By straddling the line between the natural and the supernatural, the known and the unknown, Ram Setu invites ongoing inquiry and contemplation. It reminds us that not all truths are empirical, and that the world we inherit is shaped as much by wonder as it is by knowledge. In conclusion, whether Adam's Bridge is a natural wonder or a man-made marvel may remain unresolved, and perhaps it should. For in that ambiguity lies its power. The formation is a bridge not only between lands, but between disciplines, beliefs, and generations. It connects the scientist with the seeker, the skeptic with the believer, and the past with the present. It is precisely this mystery that ensures Adam's Bridge will continue to inspire awe, reverence, and debate for generations to come. Political controversies and cultural battles, the Ram Setu legal disputes. Adam's Bridge, commonly referred to as Ram Setu in India, is more than a geological formation or a sacred relic. It has also become a flashpoint in political, legal, and cultural controversies that stretch far beyond the Pelk Strait. In recent decades, the question of whether to preserve, study, or alter the structure has ignited intense debate, inflamed religious passions, and shaped national discourse around heritage, development, and identity. The bridge has transcended its physical form to become a battlefield of ideologies, a symbol of faith and a tool of political mobilization. At the center of this storm lies the Sethusamudram Shipping Canal Project, SSCP, a massive infrastructure initiative first proposed over 150 years ago by the British and revived several times in post-independence India. The project's objective is to create a navigable shipping route between the east and west coasts of India by dredging a deep water channel through the shallow straits that separate India and Sri Lanka. This would allow ships to bypass the long detour around Sri Lanka, saving both time and fuel. From a logistical and economic standpoint, the project appeared promising. India's rapidly growing economy has created an ever-increasing demand for maritime infrastructure, and a direct sea route between the eastern and western seaports seemed like a natural step forward. In 2005, the Indian government approved the project with its proposed route cutting directly through Adams Bridge. However, this decision immediately set off a chain reaction of controversy and resistance. Religious and cultural groups, particularly Hindu organizations, were quick to oppose the plan, arguing that the dredging of Ram Setu would amount to an act of desecration. For millions of Hindus, Ram Setu is not just a sandbar, it is a sacred link to the divine built by Lord Rama and his army of Vanaras, as recorded in the epic Ramayana. Destroying or altering the structure was seen as a spiritual affront, akin to demolishing a temple or rewriting a holy text. Opposition to the project gathered steam rapidly. Devotees, scholars, environmentalists, and politicians from various parties joined the movement to save Ram Setu. Public demonstrations, petitions, and legal filings poured in. The campaign was not just about preserving a physical object. It was about asserting cultural continuity, protecting religious sentiment, and resisting what many saw as a secular state's insensitivity to the spiritual values of its citizens. In 2007, the situation escalated dramatically when the Indian government filed an affidavit in the Supreme Court stating that there was no historical or archaeological evidence to support the belief that Ram Setu was man-made or associated with Lord Rama. The affidavit referred to the Ramayana as a mythological text rather than historical documentation, and it framed the bridge as a natural formation with no special legal protection. This move backfired spectacularly. The backlash was immediate and intense. Religious leaders, opposition parties, and large swaths of the public accused the government of belittling Hindu beliefs and attempting to erase India's spiritual heritage. The Bharatiya Janata Party BJP, then in opposition, seized the opportunity to galvanize support by painting the ruling party as anti-Hindu and disconnected from the country's cultural roots. The government was forced to withdraw the affidavit and reassess its approach to the project. This episode marked a turning point in the Ram Setu discourse. What had once been a debate over infrastructure now became a proxy war for India's cultural soul. Political lines were drawn sharply. For secular parties, the issue posed a challenge: how to reconcile development goals with the religious sentiments of the majority. For right-leaning groups, the controversy was a golden opportunity to reinforce their identity-based politics and demand the protection of Hindu symbols under constitutional and heritage laws. The legal proceedings continued, and in 2008, the Supreme Court asked the government to consider alternative routes for the Sethusamudram project that would not involve disturbing the bridge. Several expert committees were formed to assess environmental, archaeological and religious aspects. However, progress remained slow, and the project was eventually put on indefinite hold, caught in the crossfire of legal uncertainty, political caution, and public emotion. Environmentalists, too, entered the fray. Many experts warned that dredging through the fragile marine ecosystem of the Palk Strait could have devastating consequences. The region is home to diverse marine life, including coral reefs, endangered sea turtles, and unique fish species. Critics argued that altering the seabed could lead to increased coastal erosion, disruption of breeding grounds, and changes in tidal patterns that might affect local fishing communities. In this way, the environmental concerns aligned with religious ones. Both argued for preservation, albeit for different reasons. Meanwhile, the debate over whether Ram Setu is man-made or natural became less relevant in the political arena. The symbolic power of the structure far outweighed the technicalities. For many, Ram Setu stood for more than stone and sand. It represented heritage identity and the right to honor one's ancestors and beliefs without interference. This sentiment resonated deeply in a country where mythology and history often blur, and where spiritual geography holds great influence over national consciousness. In 2017, the issue resurfaced when the Indian government, under the BJP administration, filed a new affidavit stating that it had no intention of destroying or harming Ram Setu in any future plans. The administration acknowledged the cultural significance of the bridge and promised to explore alternative development strategies. This was seen by many as a political concession to religious sentiment and a move to solidify the government's support base among devout Hindus. In 2021, the debate took another twist when India's Ministry of Culture authorized an underwater archaeological study of Adam's Bridge. The goal was to determine whether the formation showed signs of artificial construction. This was a significant shift in official recognition of the possibility that what had long been dismissed as myth might in fact have historical basis. While the results of the study are still pending or inconclusive, the very fact of its commissioning reflects the changing political winds. These shifts also reveal a broader trend, the transformation of sacred sites into strategic tools in the culture wars. Ram Setu is not alone in this regard. Across India, and indeed around the world, ancient monuments, religious relics, and mythological symbols are increasingly entangled in modern political narratives. From Jerusalem to Ayodhya, spiritual geography is being reshaped by legal arguments, nationalist rhetoric, and identity politics. Some critics worry that such politicization may erode the sanctity of these sites. When spiritual symbols become pawns in political chess games, they risk being reduced to slogans or vote banks. Others argue that bringing these symbols into public debate is long overdue and necessary in a democracy that respects pluralism. Either way, the story of Ram Setu is no longer just about rocks and sea. It is about who gets to define the meaning of the past, the priorities of the present, and the direction of the future. In conclusion, the political and cultural controversies surrounding Adam's Bridge are emblematic of the challenges modern India faces as it balances tradition with progress, faith with science, and identity with plurality. The legal disputes, far from being mere procedural squabbles, are deeply woven into the emotional and philosophical fabric of the nation. Ram Setu has become more than a myth or a causeway. It is now a mirror reflecting the complexities of Indian society, where the ancient and the modern are in constant dialogue, and where every bridge is both a passage and a battleground, a symbol of faith and national identity in modern India. In the ever-evolving narrative of India, few landmarks capture the nation's imagination, like the Ram Setu, also known as Adam's Bridge. While its physical form is composed of limestone shoals stretching between India and Sri Lanka, its symbolic power resonates across political, religious, and cultural spheres. In modern India, Ram Setu has transcended its geological identity to become an emblem of collective faith and national consciousness. It stands at the intersection of mythology and nationalism, of sacred memory and civic pride, shaping not only how Indians see their past, but how they define their identity in the present. For centuries, Indian civilization has been deeply entwined with myth and metaphor. Stories from the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the Puranas, and the Vedas have been more than just spiritual texts. They are foundational narratives that offer moral guidance, social structure, and historical perspective. In that context, Ram Setu isn't just a remnant of a story. It is the physical residue of an epic that still informs the values and aspirations of millions. To many Hindus, the bridge is a divine artifact constructed by Lord Rama and his Vanara army as they journeyed to rescue Sita from the demon king Ravana. Whether scientifically verifiable or not, this belief is sacred. It roots people in their past and connects them to a moral universe governed by courage, dharma, righteous duty, and the triumph of good over evil. In a nation where 80% of the population identifies as Hindu, such symbols carry profound emotional and cultural weight. Over time, this reverence has extended beyond religious circles into the very language of patriotism. Ram Setu, once a bridge of myth, is now frequently evoked in political speeches, textbooks, and media campaigns as a symbol of India's ancient greatness, a reminder that this land was once the stage for divine acts and sacred missions. In this way, the bridge serves a dual purpose: spiritual sanctuary and national monument. This blending of spirituality with civic identity became particularly pronounced in the post-independence era, as India began to define itself not only through its diversity and secular constitution, but also through cultural revivalism. Many saw Ram Setu as a natural symbol around which national pride could coalesce, an artifact that was uniquely Indian, steeped in both faith and historical grandeur. Movements like Save Ram Setu were not merely about protecting rocks in the sea. They were declarations of cultural sovereignty, resistance against colonial narratives that dismissed Indian mythology as mere fiction, and efforts to reclaim a sacred geography long relegated to the margins by modernity. This reimagining of Ram Setu as a national icon was aided significantly by the rise of Hindu nationalism, particularly in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. As parties like the Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP, gained political momentum, they increasingly emphasized symbols of Hindu heritage as part of their broader ideological project. Ram Setu became one such symbol, elevated from a disputed causeway to a monument of Bharatiya Sanskriti, Indian culture. Political leaders began to reference it in parliamentary debates, campaign rallies, and even development plans, insisting that India's progress must be built upon the bedrock of its spiritual and cultural foundations. This cultural elevation was also facilitated by mass media. Documentaries, television serials, YouTube videos, and religious programming began showcasing Ram Setu as a hidden marvel, a mystical bridge or proof of Rama's journey. These portrayals were often accompanied by dramatic music, CGI reconstructions, and testimonials from priests and pundits, creating an emotional connection with viewers and reinforcing the perception that Ram Setu was a sacred inheritance under threat. The bridge became part of India's living mythology, once again not just in temples and scriptures, but in living rooms, school debates, and even boardroom presentations. What makes Ram Setu uniquely powerful in the modern Indian psyche is its ability to unite multiple strands of identity: religious, nationalistic, historical, and emotional. For one person, it may be a symbol of unwavering devotion to Lord Rama. For another, it may signify resistance against perceived cultural erasure by secular elites or foreign archaeologists. For others still, it may represent the grandeur of India's ancient engineering capabilities, proof that India's ancestors were not only spiritual, but technologically advanced, a point often made to challenge Western narratives of Indian backwardness. In many ways, the reverence for Ram Setu mirrors a larger societal longing, the desire to find continuity between the past and the present. In a rapidly changing nation faced with modernization, globalization, and the erosion of traditional values, the bridge provides psychological and emotional anchoring. It offers a sense of permanence in a world of flux. By venerating the bridge, people are also venerating an idea of India that is timeless, moral, and victorious, a counterbalance to the chaos of modern urban life, political fragmentation, and cultural homogenization. Yet this symbolic power also comes with challenges. For some secular voices and pluralistic thinkers, the appropriation of Ram Setu into the national narrative risks marginalizing non-Hindu perspectives. After all, the region is home to multiple faiths: Buddhists, Christians, Muslims, and atheists, many of whom may see the politicization of a mythological structure as exclusionary. Critics argue that national identity must be inclusive, rooted in shared civic values, rather than religious symbolism. If symbols like Ram Setu are enshrined without nuance, they warn the result may be a narrowing of the national imagination, where only certain identities are celebrated, while others are relegated to the periphery. Environmentalists, too, have sounded the alarm. As the call to protect Ram Setu gains traction, questions arise about how best to preserve it without romanticizing or freezing it in time. Should it be declared a national monument and thus fall under the protection of the Archaeological Survey of India? Should its surrounding ecosystems be prioritized over any potential tourism revenue or religious pilgrimage development? What role should local communities, especially coastal dwellers and fishermen, play in these decisions? As always, the symbolism of Ram Setu collides with the practicalities of governance, environmental justice, and regional equity. Despite these tensions, the emotional charge surrounding the bridge remains undiminished. In 2023, the Indian government submitted affidavits in the Supreme Court, reaffirming its commitment not to damage Ram Setu in any future infrastructure project. The administration also indicated interest in granting it heritage status. Public reactions ranged from celebratory to skeptical, but the overarching sentiment was clear: Ram Setu mattered, not just as a cluster of shoals, but as an idea, a myth that had matured into memory, and a memory that had transformed into meaning. In schools, children learn about Lord Rama's journey through cartoons, epics, and classroom discussions. In households, Elders recount stories of the bridge during religious festivals or over evening meals. In politics, it features as a rallying cry, a symbol of cultural pride. In media, it resurfaces every few years as new photographs, satellite imagery, or archaeological surveys reawaken the debate. In every corner of society, from temple towns to tech cities, Ram Setu exists not merely in the ocean, but in the collective consciousness of a nation still seeking itself in the reflection of its myths. In some, Adam's Bridge, Ram Setu, is no longer a question of stones under the sea. It is a question of who we are, what we believe, and how we wish to narrate our journey as a people. It invites us to ask, can myth and science coexist? Can faith inspire without dominating? Can national identity be inclusive yet rooted in heritage? These are not just questions about a bridge. They are questions about the soul of modern India. And in pondering them, we discover that perhaps the true bridge Ram Setu offers is not between two pieces of land, but between memory and meaning, past and present, belief and belonging. Ram Setu in the global consciousness, beyond India's borders. While Ram Setu, also known as Adam's Bridge, holds immense religious, cultural, and political significance within India, its story does not end at the national border. In recent decades, this enigmatic formation, stretching across the shallow sea between India and Sri Lanka, has stirred global curiosity, academic debate, diasporic pride, and even geopolitical tension. The narrative of Ram Setu has traveled far beyond its limestone shoals, finding resonance in discussions about ancient civilizations, religious freedom, environmental conservation, and the enduring power of myth in a rational age. It has become a case study in how a local symbol deeply rooted in a regional epic can spark conversations across continents, uniting and dividing, inspiring and challenging in equal measure. One of the most striking aspects of Ram Setu's global reach is its connection to the Indian diaspora. Across North America, Europe, Australia, and the Middle East, millions of Indians have carried with them not only memories of festivals, languages, and rituals, but also narratives like that of Lord Rama and his journey to Lanka. For these communities, Ram Setu is not merely a curiosity. It is a spiritual touchstone that connects them to ancestral lands and divine stories. As diasporic Hindus raise temples, organize cultural festivals, and teach their children about the Ramayana, the legend of the bridge often becomes central to their identity, a sacred landmark that symbolizes endurance, dharma, and divine will. This diasporic devotion is often amplified through digital media. In YouTube, videos online, forums, Hindu apologetics, websites and documentaries, the bridge is cited as evidence of ancient engineering marvels, often framed as a rebuttal to colonial and Western narratives that dismissed Indian mythologies as mere fables. The assertion that NASA imagery supports the existence of a man-made structure between India and Sri Lanka is commonly circulated, even though the agency has explicitly stated that their satellite images cannot determine the origin or age of the formation. Yet in the minds of many, the bridge has become a symbol of civilizational pride, proof that the ancients were not primitive but technologically advanced, guided not just by faith but by sophisticated understanding of nature and geometry. This claim has led to increased interest among amateur historians, ancient alien theorists, and New Age spiritualists outside the Indian community. In online spaces, Ram Setu is often linked with other lost civilizations or mysterious technologies such as Atlantis, the pyramids of Egypt, or the Nazca Lines in Peru. While these interpretations often blur the lines between science and pseudoscience, they do reflect a global fascination with the unknown, a hunger to believe that human history is richer, stranger, and more interconnected than mainstream textbooks might suggest. However, this global mythologizing of Ram Setu has also invited scrutiny and skepticism from academic and scientific communities. Geologists around the world have weighed in on the debate, with most concluding that the formation is a natural accumulation of sandbanks, coral reefs, and limestone shoals shaped by oceanic and atmospheric patterns over thousands of years. Peer-reviewed journals and international geological surveys support the theory that while the structure is unusual, it is not necessarily man-made. Such conclusions, while grounded in empirical research, often clash with the devotional interpretations embraced by many Hindus and cultural nationalists. This tension between faith and science, between sacred myth and secular inquiry, mirrors similar debates across the world. Whether it's the Shroud of Turin in Italy, the Tomb of Jesus in Jerusalem, or the Ark of the Covenant in Ethiopia, religious landmarks with contested historical origins often become battlegrounds for larger philosophical questions. What counts as evidence? Can faith coexist with reason? Who gets to control the narrative of sacred spaces? In the case of Ram Setu, the clash is particularly intense because it involves not only spiritual belief, but also national pride and post-colonial identity formation. International media has periodically spotlighted this controversy, particularly during major political or legal developments in India. For example, when the Indian government proposed the Sethusamudram shipping canal project, which would require dredging a section of the Ram Setu, the story was covered not just in Indian outlets, but in global publications such as the New York Times, BBC Al Jazeera, and The Guardian. Headlines framed it as a clash of development and devotion, or a test of religious faith in a modern democracy. In doing so, these stories invited global audiences to consider broader questions about how modernity negotiates with tradition, especially in pluralistic societies. Ram Setu has also become an object of study in global religious studies and anthropology programs. Scholars examine it as a powerful example of sacred geography where landscapes are not merely physical, but imbued with spiritual and cultural meaning. In classrooms from Harvard to Heidelberg, students read about how rivers, mountains, caves, and bridges become metaphors for spiritual journeys. Ram Setu in this context is discussed not just as a Hindu landmark, but as a universal archetype, a threshold between worlds, a passage from one moral plane to another. Some even draw parallels to the biblical story of Moses parting the Red Sea, or the Quranic story of Prophet Musa's escape from Pharaoh, highlighting how many cultures encode their highest ideals into stories of miraculous crossings. From a geopolitical standpoint, Ram Setu has added complexity to India-Sri Lanka relations. While the governments of both nations have generally approached the subject with caution and mutual respect, there have been occasional frictions over navigation, rights, marine ecology, and religious tourism. Pilgrimages to the site from Indian Hindus often involve crossing sensitive maritime zones, and there have been calls in both countries to formalize or regulate these visits. At the same time, environmental organizations in Sri Lanka have raised concerns about the ecological impacts of increased tourist traffic and possible dredging, calling for joint conservation efforts. These issues reflect how a shared natural formation can become a source of diplomatic negotiation, uniting two nations through geography, while challenging them to manage competing interests. Tourism itself has become another globalized dimension of the Ram Setu story. Eco-tourism and spiritual tourism operators from around the world now offer packages that include boat trips near the bridge, guided narratives of the Ramayana, and visits to nearby temples. International travelers, both devotees and curiosity seekers, are drawn by the allure of the myth, the beauty of the marine landscape, and the cultural richness of Tamil Nadu and northern Sri Lanka. In this sense, Ram Setu is being recontextualized not just as a place of worship or debate, but also as a global destination where myth meets marketing and devotion is packaged with adventure. In the academic world, too, Ram Setu is increasingly cited in debates over the decolonization of knowledge. Scholars argue that the dismissal of texts like the Ramayana as mere myth rather than history reflects a Eurocentric bias that prioritizes Western frameworks of chronology, evidence, and authorship. They call for a more pluralistic epistemology that values indigenous ways of knowing, where oral traditions, sacred texts, and mythopoetic imagination are not dismissed, but studied with rigor and respect. In this paradigm, Ram Setu is not simply a disputed bridge. It is a symbol of epistemic sovereignty, the right of a culture to tell its own story in its own way on its own terms. Ultimately, the global significance of Ram Setu lies not in its rocks or shoals, but in its role as a mirror. For the Indian diaspora, it reflects the enduring strength of cultural memory. For scholars, it reveals the tensions between modernity and myth. For environmentalists, it warns of the fragile equilibrium between reverence and exploitation. For global audiences, it offers a case study in how ancient stories can survive and even thrive in a disenchanted world. In a time when humanity is grappling with questions of identity, belonging, and purpose, symbols like Ram Setu remind us that sacred stories are not relics of the past. They are living languages still capable of inspiring faith, shaping politics, and building bridges, both literal and metaphorical, across oceans, generations, and belief systems. Ram Setu, once walked upon by gods in the minds of believers, is now walked upon by the thoughts of the world. In that journey from the sands of Dhanushkodi to the digital platforms of New York and Nairobi, it teaches us a profound truth that in the theater of human imagination, myth is not the opposite of reality. It is its echo, its soul, and sometimes its most enduring truth.